The bridge of HFY hummed with an unsettling silence. Admiral Catherine Steel Storm Reynolds stood before the massive holographic display, her weathered hands clasped behind her back so tightly that her knuckles had turned white. The real-time feed showed nothing but debris now, twisted metal and frozen vapor where the hospital ship Hope's Cradle had been just moments before. "Play it again," she commanded, her voice steady despite the storm raging behind her steel-gray eyes. Lieutenant Sarah Martinez hesitated for just a fraction of a second before complying. The young officer's fingers trembled as she queued up the recording. The holographic display flickered, and once again they watched the massacre unfold. The hospital ship, its hull gleaming with the universal medical symbol and children's artwork visible even at this distance, desperately tried to outmaneuver the Drachnid pursuit vessels. Its shields, designed for radiation protection rather than combat, flickered weakly against the initial barrage. 2,000 children, Reynolds murmured, more to herself than to her bridge crew. From 12 different species, all of them fleeing from worlds the Drachnid Empire had already conquered. She turned to face the Combat Information Center, where dozens of officers monitored their stations with rigid professionalism that barely masked their horror. The recording reached its devastating conclusion. A Drachnid dreadnought, its hull decorated with the skull-like insignia of the Empire's purification fleet, fired its main battery. The lance of energy cut through the hospital ship's remaining defenses, like they weren't even there. The ship's hull began to break apart, emergency escape pods launching in all directions. But the Drachnid ships weren't finished. They methodically targeted and destroyed each escape pod, one by one. Enough. Reynolds raised her hand, and the recording froze on the final frame. She walked slowly around the holographic display, studying the Drachnid ship's formations and weapon signatures. "Commander Jackson, what's the status of the 7th Fleet?" William Jackson, her executive officer, stepped forward with a data tablet. "All ships report ready, Admiral. The HSS Hyperion, Thunderchild, Defiant, and Normandy are at full combat readiness. The rest of the fleet is standing by at jump points throughout the system." Reynolds nodded, then turned to her communications officer. "Lieutenant Martinez, get me a direct line to Fleet Command. Priority Alpha." The young officer's fingers danced across her console. "Channel open, Mom." The holographic display shifted, showing the stern face of Fleet Admiral Harrison. Before he could speak, Reynolds cut in. "Sir, I'm requesting immediate authorization to deploy the 7th Fleet with full weapons release. No restrictions." Harrison's expression didn't change, but his eyes narrowed slightly. "Catherine, you know what you're asking. Those technologies haven't been field-tested in actual combat conditions. And the Drachnid Empire thinks that makes us weak," Reynolds replied, her voice taking on an edge that made several junior officers flinch. "They've pushed and pushed, testing our patience, thinking our restraint was fear. Now they're murdering children, sir. If we don't act now, how many more will die while we hold back our true strength?" There was a long pause. Harrison's image flickered as he leaned forward. "The President has already contacted me about this incident. You have his full authorization, Catherine. Show them why humanity has never lost a war we didn't choose to fight." "Understood, sir." Reynolds straightened, her expression hardening into the look that had earned her the call sign Steel Storm during the Mars campaign. "We'll need the quantum targeting codes for Project Zeus. Uploading now. God help them, Catherine. They have no idea what they're about to face." Harrison's image faded, leaving the bridge in momentary darkness before the regular lights resumed. Reynolds turned to face her crew, and every officer on the bridge felt the electric change in the atmosphere. "Sound General Quarters. I want the entire fleet ready for jump in 15 minutes. It's time to show the galaxy that humanity's patience has limits, and they just found them." Throughout the massive vessel, klaxons began to sound. Reynolds watched as her crew sprang into action, their movements sharp and precise. She turned back to the frozen image of the destroyed hospital ship, her voice dropping to a whisper that only Commander Jackson could hear. They think they know war. They think they know violence. It's time they learned what happens when you push a species that turned their own evolution into a choice. Signal the fleet, Commander. We hunt. Deep within the crimson halls of the maximum security facility on Mars, Intelligence Officer Zextal pressed his scaled hands against the neural interface. His third eye, the mark of a high-born Drachnid tactician, pulsed with desperate energy as he transmitted his final report to the Empire. "You must listen," he hissed into the quantum communication array. "Everything we thought we knew about the humans is wrong. Catastrophically wrong." Supreme Commander Vexthor's holographic image flickered before him, the warrior's ceremonial scars glowing with barely contained contempt. "You dare interrupt a war council to spread more of your fearful ramblings, Intelligence Officer." Zextal's scales rippled with frustration. "I spent 3 cycles in their custody, studying them. Their history, their evolution, their very nature defies everything we know about sentient species development." The Supreme Commander's image leaned forward, his multiple rows of eyes narrowing. "Explain quickly, before I terminate this transmission." "Look at these records," Zextal said, transmitting data through the neural link. "Every other species we've encountered evolved through natural selection. They adapted to their environments over millions of cycles. But humans?" He laughed, a sound that made the guards outside his cell shift uncomfortably. "Humans refuse to accept their limitations." Images flashed through the transmission. Ancient human cities drowning in rising seas, whole continents scared by nuclear fire, plagues that should have ended their species. But after each catastrophe, something remarkable happened. "They didn't wait for evolution," Zextal continued. "When their world grew too hot, they didn't adapt over generations. They built machines to cool it. When radiation poisoned their genes, they rewrote their own genetic code. When diseases threatened to wipe them out, they didn't develop natural immunity. They created artificial ones within decades." Vexthor waved a dismissive hand. "Yet their ships are fewer than ours, their weapons seemingly primitive. They hide behind diplomacy and treaties." "Because you're not seeing the pattern." Zextal's third eye flared brightly. "Every time they faced extinction, they haven't just survived. They've emerged stronger. They don't evolve through natural selection. They force their evolution through sheer willpower and technological innovation." He transmitted more data, classified reports from previous encounters. "Look at their response times in battle simulations. Look at how they solve problems. No other species thinks like them, because no other species had to claw their way up from being prey to becoming the ultimate predator on their world." "You sound like you admire these primitives," Vexthor growled. "I fear them," Zextal corrected. "And you should too. Do you know what their children learn about in their schools? Not just their victories. They study every defeat, every mistake, every near-extinction event in their history. They don't hide from their failures. They turn them into weapons." The intelligence officers' voices dropped lower. "And now you've given them something they've never had before. A truly united purpose. That hospital ship you destroyed. It was called Hope's Cradle. Even I can appreciate the symbolism of what you've done." Vexthor's image straightened, a flicker of uncertainty finally showing in his posture. "What are you suggesting?" "I'm not suggesting anything. I'm warning you. History shows that humans are most dangerous not when they're strong, but when they've been backed into a corner." Zextal suddenly stopped, his scales paling as alarms began blaring throughout the facility. One of his guards rushed in. "Sir, you need to see this. The human 7th Fleet. It's moving." Zextal turned back to the hologram of his Supreme Commander. It's too late. You're about to learn what I've been trying to tell you. Humans don't accept defeat. They don't follow the natural order. And they never, ever fight the same way twice. May the void have mercy on our empire, because I've studied human history enough to know they won't. The transmission cut off as the facility's lights dimmed to emergency power. In his cell, Zextal closed all three of his eyes and whispered an ancient Drachnid prayer. He had seen the future in human historical records, and it belonged to those who refused to accept their limitations. The war room aboard the HSS Hyperion fell silent as Admiral Reynolds placed her hand on the quantum scanner. Holographic displays sprang to life, filling the darkened chamber with a ghostly blue light that illuminated the faces of her senior staff. What I'm about to show you has been hidden since we first made contact with alien life, Reynolds said, her voice carrying to every corner of the room. Computer, initiate protocol disclosure 7. Authorization. Reynolds, Catherine, Admiral, code Black Omega. The room's central hologram shifted, displaying a complex web of technological schematics that made even the most seasoned engineers among her staff draw sharp breaths. Commander Jackson stepped forward, his eyes wide. Admiral, are these what I think they are? Reynolds nodded, manipulating the display to focus on a particular weapon system, quantum entangled missiles. While the rest of the galaxy focused on breaking the light speed barrier, we found a way around it. Each warhead is quantum locked with its twin in our launch bays. When one moves, the other moves instantly. No travel time, no warning, no defense. She shifted the display again. The hologram now showed what appeared to be a neural network, but its complexity made several officers step back in awe. This is Nemesis, Reynolds continued, a combat AI that makes decisions in picosecons, coordinating our entire fleet as a single organism. It doesn't just predict enemy movements. It calculates every possible combat scenario simultaneously across multiple quantum states. Lieutenant Martinez raised her hand, her voice trembling slightly. Ma'am, if we've had these technologies, why haven't we used them before? The Drachnid Empire has been expanding for years, destroying countless civilizations. Reynolds' expression hardened. Because humanity learned something important during our own blood-soaked history. The most dangerous weapon is one your enemy doesn't know exists. She gestured, and the hologram changed again, showing a timeline of human military development. Every time we revealed a new weapon in our past, our enemies adapted. So when we reached the stars, we chose a different strategy. We showed the galaxy outdated technology, let them think they had the upper hand. All while we watched, learned, and prepared. The Admiral walked through the hologram, her figure casting strange shadows through the tactical displays. But Project ZUS, that's our masterpiece. With a gesture, she brought up the final schematic. The officers stared in stunned silence as they realized what they were seeing. We didn't just break the laws of physics, Reynolds said quietly. We rewrote them. ZUS creates localized time dilation fields. Inside them, we can experience hours while the enemy experiences seconds. Every shot will be perfectly aimed, every maneuver flawlessly executed, because for us, time itself becomes a weapon. Commander Jackson shook his head in wonder. The engineering requirements for something like this, it should be impossible. Reynolds smiled, but there was no humor in it. Humanity's greatest strength isn't our technology, Commander. It's our refusal to accept the word impossible. When they said we couldn't survive on other worlds, we terraformed them. When they said we couldn't break the light barrier, we found a way to ignore it entirely. And when they said we couldn't control time itself, she let the statement hang in the air as she turned to face her crew. I want you all to understand something. What we're about to do isn't just about revenge for that hospital ship. It's about showing the galaxy that there are lines that must never be crossed. The Drachnid Empire thinks they're the ultimate predator among the stars. It's time they learn that humanity has been the alpha predator all along. We just chose not to bare our teeth until now. The room's lighting returned to normal as Reynolds straightened her uniform. You have 1 hour to study these systems. When we exit jump space, I want every officer on this ship to know exactly what we're capable of. Because today, we stop pretending to be less than we are. Today, we show the galaxy why humanity's restraint was never about fear. It was about mercy. As her officers dispersed to their stations, Reynolds remained in the war room, watching the tactical display of the Drachnid fleet's last known position. They think they know war, she whispered to the empty room. Let's show them what war looks like when humanity stops holding back. Reality tore apart as the HSS Hyperion led the 7th Fleet out of jump space. 3,000 Drachnid warships hung against the backdrop of a binary star system, their crescent formation casting long shadows across the void. The massive ships, their hull plating decorated with the skull markings of countless victories, began to shift into attack positions. Admiral Reynolds stood at the center of her bridge, watching the enemy fleet through the crystalline display. Behind her, Lieutenant Martinez's console chirped with an incoming transmission. "They're hailing us, Admiral," Martins reported, her fingers dancing across the haptic interface. "It's their fleet commander." "Put it through." Reynolds' voice was winter cold. The holographic display shimmed, revealing the massive form of Drachnid High Admiral Kvex, his scales gleaming with ceremonial oil. "Human vessel," he rumbled, multiple rows of eyes blinking in sequence. "You have entered restricted space with an insufficient escort. Power down your weapons and prepare to be boarded. Resist, and you will share the fate of that pathetic hospital ship." Reynolds didn't immediately respond. Instead, she made a subtle hand gesture, and Commander Jackson initiated a series of pre-planned maneuvers. The human fleet, barely a third the size of the Drachnid Armada, began moving into what appeared to be a scattered defensive formation. "High Admiral Kvex," Reynolds finally said, her voice carrying an edge that made several bridge officers straighten in their seats. "I studied your battle records. 300 years of victory. 42 species subjugated. 8 civilizations completely eradicated. All using the same crescent formation. The same overwhelming force doctrine." She paused, watching as her fleet continued its apparently chaotic deployment. On the tactical displays, warning indicators flashed as the human ships moved into what every military academy would consider suicide positions. "Do you know what fascinates me most about your strategy, Kvex?" Reynolds continued, her tone almost conversational. "It's not how many battles you've won. It's how long you've gone without adapting, without innovating. You found something that worked, and you never questioned if there might be something better." Kvex's upper crest flared with anger. "You dare lecture me on military doctrine? Your ships are already in our kill zones. Your formation is that of an amateur. This will not even qualify as a battle." Reynolds smiled, and something in that expression made the Drachnid commander's scales ripple with an unfamiliar sensation. Doubt. "Commander Jackson," Reynolds said without taking her eyes off the hologram, "are all ships in position?" "Yes, Admiral. The web is ready." "Excellent." Reynolds squared her shoulders. "High Admiral Kvex, let me tell you what's actually happening right now. Those amateur positions we've taken, each one was calculated by an AI that processes combat scenarios faster than your species can think. Every ship in my fleet is exactly where it needs to be for what comes next." She gestured, and the tactical display highlighted the Drachnid formation. "Your crescent pattern is about to become your tomb. You see, while you were perfecting the same strategy for 3 centuries, humanity was learning every possible way to counter it. We've run this scenario 10 million times. We know every move you're about to make before you make it." Kvex's expression shifted from contempt to uncertainty. "You're bluffing. Your ships are scattered, vulnerable." "Lieutenant Martinez," Reynolds cut him off. "Initialize Project ZUS. Authorization code. The Children of Hope's Cradle." "ZUS initiating, Admiral," Martins reported as her console began to pulse with energy readings that made the Drachnid sensors scream warnings. Reynolds leaned forward, her voice dropping to a whisper that somehow carried more weight than any shout. "You should have left those children alone, Kovacs. Now you're about to learn why humanity never lost a war we didn't choose to fight, and why the greatest military mistake in the galaxy's history was believing our restraint was weakness." The last thing Kovacs saw before the transmission cut was Reynolds making a single gesture, drawing her hand across her throat in the ancient human signal for what was about to happen to his entire fleet. The universe held its breath. On the bridge of the HS at Hyperion, time itself seemed to crystallize as Project ZUS activated. Lieutenant Martinez's voice cut through the silence. "Time dilation field stable. Admiral, we're operating at a 10,000 to 1 ratio. What the enemy will experience as 3.7 seconds will be approximately 10 hours for us." Admiral Reynolds nodded, her eyes fixed on the now frozen Drachnid fleet before them. Status of the neural network. "Nemesis Combat AI is online," Commander Jackson reported. "All ships are synchronized. We're reading perfect quantum entanglement across all weapon systems." Reynolds allowed herself a small smile. "Begin the operation. Execute pattern Stormweaver." The human fleet moved with impossible grace. To an outside observer, the ships would have seemed to teleport through space, appearing and disappearing like ghostly apparitions. But inside the time dilation field, each movement was deliberate, calculated, and precise. "First wave, launch quantum-paired missiles," Reynolds commanded. "Target their command and control ships." Across the human fleet, launch bays opened. The missiles emerged in pairs, one remaining in the launch tube while its quantum-entangled twin accelerated toward the enemy. The laws of physics themselves seemed to bend as the weapons simply appeared inside the Drachnid shields, their paired counterparts moving in perfect synchronization back in the human launch base. "Confirmed hits on 87 command ships," Martins reported. "Their chain of command is fragmenting." Reynolds watched the tactical display as the Nemesis AI coordinated their fleet's movements. Human ships slipped through the gaps in the Drachnid formation like water through stone, each vessel moving with perfect precision in the stretched time of the ZUS field. "Second wave," she ordered. "Execute the scissor protocol." The human fleet split into two groups, moving in opposite directions through the frozen Drachnid crescent. Energy weapons fired in careful sequences, each shot placed with surgical precision to disable rather than destroy where possible. "Admiral," Jackson called out, "I'm reading power spikes in some of the Drachnid ships. They're trying to adapt their shields." "They won't have time," Reynolds replied. In their reference frame, "This battle is already half over. Deploy the blacklight drones." Swarms of autonomous drones emerged from the human ships, their quantum processors allowing them to operate even in the extreme time dilation. They darted between the Drachnid vessels, mapping shield frequencies and transmitting data back to Nemesis. "Interesting," Reynolds mused, watching a particular section of the enemy fleet. Their auxiliary ships are attempting to form a secondary defense line. They're learning, even in these fractional seconds. Commander Jackson, highlight those ships for preservation. That kind of adaptability should be rewarded. "Aye, Admiral." Marking them now. The battle continued with the precision of a symphony. Human ships moved through space like dancers, each motion calculated by Nemesis to place them exactly where they needed to be. The quantum-entangled weapons struck with perfect accuracy, while conventional weapons were fired with the luxury of what seemed like hours to aim each shot. "Ma'am," Martins called out, We're approaching the time dilation limit. 2 hours remaining in our frame. Reynolds nodded. More than enough time. Begin final phase. Execute pattern starfall. The human fleet regrouped, forming a perfect sphere around the remaining Drachnid ships. In the stretched time of the ZUS field, they could see the panic beginning to register in the enemy vessels' power signatures as their crews started to realize what was happening. Send one last message to their fleet, Reynolds commanded. Text only. In their language. Remember the children of Hope's cradle. As the message was transmitted, the human fleet fired in perfect unison. Each shot was precisely calculated to disable rather than destroy where possible, to incapacitate rather than annihilate. Because even in this moment of ultimate victory, humanity remembered its own history and chose to show the mercy it had not been shown to them. Time dilation field beginning to collapse, Martins reported. 3, 2, 1. Reality snapped back into normal flow. To the rest of the universe, only seconds had passed, but those seconds had changed everything. Where once floated a mighty armada now drifted a perfect pattern of disabled ships and debris, each piece precisely placed to avoid creating navigational hazards. Admiral Reynolds stood from her command chair. Signal the medical ships. Let's show them another thing that makes humans unique. How we treat those who surrendered to our mercy. High Admiral Kvext stared at his tactical display in stunned silence. His mind struggled to process what his eyes were seeing. 3.7 seconds. That's all it had taken. His mighty fleet, the pride of the Drachnid Empire, lay in precisely arranged patterns of disabled ships and debris. Play it again, he commanded, his voice barely a whisper. The sensor officer, one of the few still functioning stations on his crippled flagship, complied. The holographic replay showed the human fleet seemingly teleporting through space, their ships moving in ways that defied natural law. Each movement was perfect, each strike precise. It wasn't just a defeat, it was art written in the language of war. Incoming transmission from the human flagship, his communications officer reported, scales pale with shock. Admiral Reynolds' image appeared before him, her expression not of triumph, but of solemn purpose. High Admiral Kvex, your fleet is disabled. Your weapons are offline. And now, you're going to listen. Across the battlefield, similar scenes played out on every surviving Drachnid ship. The footage of the battle was already spreading across the galaxy's quantum communication networks. On 10,000 worlds, military analysts watched in horror as their understanding of warfare was rewritten in less than 4 seconds. Send medical teams to the critically damaged ships first, Reynolds commanded her fleet. Priority to those who showed tactical innovation during the engagement. They're the ones most likely to understand and accept what happens next. The human medical ships moved with the same precision as their combat vessels had moments before. Each one took position near a disabled Drachnid ship, their advanced medical pods launching to save the lives of those who had been their enemies seconds ago. On a neutral trading station near the battle site, the gathered representatives of 30 species watched the footage in loop. They saw how the human ships had not just won. They had controlled every aspect of the battle with almost casual ease. Look at the debris patterns, a Zentari science officer noted, their crystalline form vibrating with excitement. It's not random. They placed every piece of wreckage deliberately, creating clear lanes for emergency response and future navigation. A Morrican war sage shook his furred head in disbelief. The level of coordination required, it's not just advanced technology. This is something else entirely. They were fighting in a different time frame than the Drachnid fleet. Back on the battlefield, Admiral Reynolds continued her address to the defeated Drachnid commander. For 3 centuries, your empire has expanded through brute force, believing that overwhelming numbers and proven tactics were the height of military evolution. You never asked yourselves a simple question. What if someone was letting you win? She gestured, and the display split to show historical footage of early human conflicts. We learned long ago that the most powerful weapon is the one your enemy doesn't know exists. Every time we fought you, every skirmish, every defeat, we were studying you, learning you, preparing for this moment. Kvex found his voice at last. Why? He asked. Why wait until now? Reynolds' expression hardened. Because we hoped we wouldn't have to show our true strength. We wanted peaceful coexistence. But then you targeted a hospital ship. You killed children who were under our protection. And you learned what every human enemy throughout history has learned. We are most dangerous when we're fighting to protect others. The medical teams continued their work as she spoke. On the quantum networks, the galaxy watched as human medical technology, just as advanced as their weapons, saved thousands of Drachnid lives. This wasn't just a battle, Kvex, Reynolds continued. This was a message to the galaxy. Humanity has been the silent guardian at the gates, holding back our power until it was truly needed. Now everyone knows why the terms human and victory have been synonymous throughout our history. She paused, looking at something off-screen before turning back. Your empire will survive this day, Kvex, because unlike you, we understand that true power lies not in destruction, but in the choice to show mercy. Remember that when you return home, you're alive not because we failed to kill you, but because we chose not to. The Grand Chamber of the HSS Hyperion had never been used for its intended purpose until now. Admiral Reynolds stood at the head of the ancient table, its surface carved from a single piece of earth oak, a reminder of humanity's origins among the stars. Before her stood the collected leadership of the Drachnid Empire, High Admiral Kvex, 3 fleet commanders, and the Empire's supreme diplomatic envoy, who had arrived through quantum jump as soon as news of the battle reached their homeworld. You come before us seeking terms, Reynolds began, her voice carrying the weight of countless stars. But first, you will watch this. The chamber's holographic system activated, displaying not the battle they expected, but something far more personal. The final moments of the hospital ship Hope's Cradle played out in perfect detail, including something the Drachnid leaders had never bothered to see: the faces of the children inside. 2,017 children, Reynolds said quietly. From 12 different species, each one with dreams, hopes, and a future that your empire erased. We want you to understand why these terms are non-negotiable. She gestured, and the display changed to show a new image. Earth, as seen from orbit. Humanity has known war longer than your empire has existed. We fought ourselves more viciously than you've ever fought others. And through all that bloodshed, we learned something your species never did: the true purpose of power. Commander Jackson stepped forward, distributing quantum tablets to each Drachnid leader. As they activated, their surfaces displayed the terms of surrender in both languages. You will note, Reynolds continued, that we're not demanding territory. We're not seeking reparations. We're not even requiring you to disarm. Instead, we require something far more challenging: change. The terms began to scroll across their screens. 1. The establishment of a joint human Drachnid Peace Academy. 2. Mandatory cultural exchange programs between both species. 3. The creation of a galactic humanitarian response fleet. 4. Converting former conquest fleets into rescue and relief forces. 5. Opening all borders to refugees and aid. 6. Joint scientific research focused on medical and civilian applications. Your empire has spent centuries perfecting the art of taking life, Reynolds said, pacing the length of the table. Now you will learn something far more difficult: how to preserve it. The supreme diplomatic envoy, his scales shifting in patterns of confusion, spoke up. These terms, they're not what we expected. Where are the punishments? The demands for our surrender. Reynolds stopped, turning to face him fully. Punishment. You still don't understand. We could have destroyed your entire fleet. We could have used Project ZUS to eliminate every military installation in your empire before you even knew you were under attack. But that would have made us no better than you." She touched a control, and the display changed again, showing the medical ships still tending to the injured from the battle. "Look at your wounded. We're saving them with medical technology we could have used to create weapons. The same principles that let us manipulate time could have been used to create plagues. Instead, we use them to heal." "But why?" Kivex asked, his voice heavy with the weight of understanding finally beginning to dawn. "Because that's the choice humanity made long ago," Reynolds replied. "When we first reached for the stars, we had to decide what kind of species we would be. We chose to be guardians rather than conquerors. And now we're giving your empire the same choice." She stood at the head of the table again, her presence filling the room. "You have 6 hours to sign these terms, not because we can't wait longer, but because every hour you delay is another hour someone, somewhere, needs the help your ships could provide. It's time for the Drachnid Empire to learn what we learned. True power isn't in the ships you can destroy, but in the lives you choose to save." The chamber fell silent as the Drachnid leaders looked at each other, then back at the terms. They were being offered something they had never considered. Not just peace, but purpose. 1 year later, the massive viewing gallery of the newly constructed Galactic Humanitarian Alliance headquarters on Earth buzzed with activity. Representatives from over 200 species gathered to witness something many had thought impossible: the graduation of the first joint human Drachnid emergency response fleet. Admiral Reynolds, now Supreme Commander of the GHA, stood at the ceremonial podium. Before her, rows of ships stretched into the distance. Former Drachnid warships, their hull markings changed from conquest tallies to medical symbols and rescue citations. "Look at them," Commander Jackson whispered, standing at her side. "A year ago, those ships were the terror of the galaxy. Now they're its greatest hope." Reynolds nodded, watching as the massive vessels performed their ceremonial formation changes. Human and Drachnid crews worked together seamlessly, their movements coordinated with the same precision once reserved for war. High Admiral Kvex, now Director of Emergency Operations, approached the podium. His scales, once decorated with war paint, now bore the blue and white patterns of the humanitarian fleet. "Supreme Commander," he said, using her new title. "The combined fleet reports ready for their first official mission." Reynolds stepped forward to address the gathered dignitaries. The scene was being broadcast across the galaxy, a testament to how much had changed in just 1 year. When humanity first reached the stars, she began, her voice carrying across the vast chamber. "We found a galaxy divided by fear and power. Species fought species, empires rose and fell, and the weak lived at the mercy of the strong. We could have joined that cycle. Project ZUS could have made us the ultimate empire." She paused, gesturing to the fleet before them. "Instead, we chose a different path. And today, we see the first fruits of that choice. These ships, once instruments of conquest, now race toward danger instead of away from it. Their crews, once enemies, now trust each other with their lives as they save others." On the parade ground below, a small group drew everyone's attention. Children from the refugee worlds, including several young Drachnid, released traditional paper lanterns into the sky. Each one bore the name of a child lost on the Hope's cradle. "We remember why this change began," Reynolds continued, her voice softening. "We remember the price of learning these lessons, but most importantly, we remember that the greatest victory isn't winning a war, it's preventing the next one." The ceremony continued as the first mission orders were distributed. A star had gone supernova near a populated system, and the new fleet would coordinate the evacuation. Human time dilation technology, once a weapon, would now give rescue teams extra hours to save lives. Later, in her private office, Reynolds looked out over the Earth at night. Cities glowed below, their lights mingling with those of various alien vessels in orbit. Commander Jackson entered, carrying a data tablet. "The latest reports from the outer colonies," he said. "Drachnid trade routes have been completely converted to aid distribution networks. Their former military academies are now training more emergency response teams than they ever had soldiers." Reynolds smiled, remembering the battle that had started it all. "How many ships are currently deployed on humanitarian missions?" "Over 7,000 combined vessels," Jackson replied. "3 times the size of the fleet we faced that day. The Drachnid Empire's former subject worlds are actually requesting their presence now. They're becoming the guardians they once needed." A small alert chimed on her desk. Another distress call from a distant world. Without hesitation, both human and Drachnid ships in orbit began moving into jump formation. "That's the real victory," Reynolds said, watching the ships depart. "Not that we could have destroyed them, but that we showed them a better way to be strong. Every life they save now is a testament to the power of choice." She turned back to her desk, where a single paper lantern from the ceremony sat, its soft light a reminder of why everything had changed. On it was written not a name, but a promise. Never again. "Send word to the fleet," she commanded. "The next class of joint training begins in 1 week. Let's make sure the galaxy never forgets that humanity's greatest weapon was never our technology. It was our capacity to choose mercy over vengeance, hope over fear, and life over death." Outside her window, the combined fleet jumped to their next rescue mission, their contrails forming a brief, beautiful pattern against the stars, a new constellation to mark the dawn of a better age.